There's this fella one time done joined the Army, and he went off to his basic training and whatnot, and went out to his first assignment, got out to his base there. He decided to call home and see how everything's going on. So he called back to his sister, hey, I'm at my first station and everything. I've done my basic training. How's everything at home? She says, well, your cat died. He said, what? Mr. Fluffykins? He's dead? Well, you didn't have to tell me like that. You could have broke it to me easy. And she says, well, what do you mean? Well, like you could have said, oh, Mr. Fluffykins, he saw a bird up on the roof, and then he went through the window and climbed up, and it got a little slippery. It had been raining earlier the day, and he slipped, and he fell, and we took him to the vet, and, you know, and on, and he says, you could have told me that way. So anyway, how's Grandma? And his sister says, well, your grandma, she saw a bird on the roof, and, well, anyway, you get the rest of it. What's my point? Well, oftentimes I have no point at all other than to simply entertain myself, but this time I did have a point, and that was that there's more than one way to tell a story, all right? We all got our strengths and our weaknesses, and let's say you're trying to tell some folks about the MMT, or the MMT as I call it, in the job guarantee. Well, we all have different ways of doing it, and so far as I know, I don't know anyone else does it the way I do. Now, does that mean mine is better? No. Is it worse? No. We all have particular strengths and weaknesses, and different audiences react to different things. So you got to think about this when you're trying to tell somebody else about how all this works, and that's certainly the stage at which our movement, if I may call it that, is at now, that we're out there trying to tell other people about it. So my point in this video is to suggest that you find your particular rhetorical strength and you run with it. I'm not going to tell you how to do it. Just going to tell you how I do it. All right. So this is just a suggestion from my perspective. Now, for me, I like to not rush into MMT and the job guarantee. I like to set it up first with an economic problem. I try to describe the way the world works first and create a problem, and then have the job guarantee and the MMT rush in as my audience is thinking, oh my God, what are we going to do? Rush in as a savior. All right. So rather than have the MMT job guarantee as my starting point, like a lot of people do, I do a little differently. And I'll tell you, part of my thinking is that I'm able to start off with concepts that feel more familiar to the listener. You're going to be challenging some beliefs that they've had for a long time. You don't want to challenge too many at once. You want to give them some familiar ground first. And so this way I do it. Let's examine. I usually do this with my PowerPoint and so forth. But let's imagine a simple economy. Let's say we got 12 people in our economy, and that each of them 12 people needs 2 units of output to reach whatever the socially accepted standard of living is. I'll go into that a little bit more in a minute, but just bear with me. And by the way, that's one of the things you want to do. Keep things simple, all right? There's all kind of directions you can go off into. Keep it as simple as you can, because people are going to have a tough time accepting what you're saying. All right, so everybody needs 2 blocks of this output to reach the socially accepted standard of living. So that means 24 altogether. We've got 12 people. You need 2 to reach the socially accepted standard of living, 24 blocks. But let us further say that each worker can actually produce 3 blocks of output. Hence, we can produce enough output for 12 people with only 8 workers. What happens to the other 4? Well, first off, firms want to minimize the use of labor. It's a cost to them, so they're not going to hire somebody that they can't sell the output that they're going to produce. So short of charity or the government stepping in, and we know we don't want that, then those 4 people go without. Furthermore, as technology increases, as technology increases and it becomes possible to produce more output with even fewer workers, it's going to be a bigger and bigger problem. I usually have some PowerPoint slides with self-checkout lanes on them, robotic automation, of course, the day that the machines become self-aware and take over. That's a little bit further in the future. I don't really have a policy recommendation for that, but up until that point, I think we have some things we can say. So, long story short, there is no reason, this is what you want to tell your audience, there is no reason to expect the private sector to create a job for every willing worker. All right? Now, Depending on your audience again, depending on your audience, I often find myself speaking to a group of middle-aged white men. They ain't gonna like hearing that capitalism isn't perfect, so you got to kind of soften it a little bit here. So you say, well, on the plus side, this process of reducing the use of labor, that's going to lower the cost for the consumer. So that's good, all right? And furthermore, it's not the private sector's job to create employment for everybody that wants a job. That's not what they're there for, right? So suggest in this simple way, in a sort of a non-threatening way, again, depending on your audience. I gave a talk in San Francisco back before the coronavirus. Alan Altman and his group, I didn't have to do all this. That they were already pretty much on the same page as me as far as the internal problems. They just wanted to get right to the solutions. So that's what I did with them. But with my typical group, you're speaking to local optimist club or whatever, then you need to soften it a little bit because you want them on your side. You don't want them already thinking, well, here's a bunch of crap from the outset, all right? Now, I got white male privilege on my side. They assume that just because I am a white male, I know what I'm talking about. Many of you understand that that's not really true. You're probably thinking right now, I don't know what I'm talking about. Fair enough. I'm not arguing with you. All right, so Americans in particular don't want to hear that capitalism is broken. So you kind of introduce it in a little subtle way there. That capitalism does what capitalism is supposed to do quite well. I don't necessarily believe that, but it's a good thing to say in your talk. Keep things simple. The way capitalism works, it creates an incentive for firms to sell products as cheaply as possible, that's getting rid of workers, while still maintaining quality. All right. So now, a possible hitch here is if you have an Austrian or a mainstream economist in your audience. Now, I've never had this happen. Oh, it came kind of close one time up in Lubbock, and I was giving a talk up there, and a fella suggested something coming from a libertarian/Austrian standpoint, but I was able to handle it fairly easily. But here's what they might say, all right, so you got to be ready for this. Rarely happens, but just in case, they might say, well, wait a minute. If everybody's capable of making 3 blocks, we got 12 people, everyone's capable of making 3 blocks, why isn't the total demand 36 blocks? Why doesn't everybody have a job? Because to them, to the Austrian and mainstream economist, the consumer's demand for goods and services is insatiable. Why wouldn't they just want more? So, that's why they never worry about that. That's why when you dig deeper into the theories underlying Austrian and neoclassical economics, you'll see that as far as they're concerned, unless there's some sort of market imperfection, we're always moving automatically towards full employment. The private sector always creates full employment. All right. So if somebody brings that up, a fella named Keynes, I got his book around here somewhere. I don't know where it is. A fella named Keynes, he done talked about this almost 100 years ago. This is a quote from him from an article in 1937. He talked about the fact that, no, consumers' demand is not insatiable, not for goods and services. And what he said was that the main I'm quoting here from this 37 article, the main prevailing psychological law seems to be that when aggregate income increases, consumption expenditure also increases, but to a somewhat lesser extent. This is a very obvious conclusion. This is word for word from Keynes. He also says, few critics or commentators so far have paid particular attention to this. He thought this was absolutely key. Now, the idea is that as people get more wealthy, the smaller the percentage of their income they spend. And there's lots and lots of data on this. Did you know that the bottom 80% of all households in America save around 5% of their income? Meanwhile, the top 20% of all households save 40%. There's 127 million households in the U.S. That means there's 25 million households that save almost half, going on half their income, right? So, no. Demands for goods and services are not insatiable. We can easily imagine a situation in which we have the capability to produce more food, more housing, more whatever, but we don't want it. Because there's a point at which, especially as a society, an individual gets wealthier, they want to put aside income for future uncertainties. Big deal to Keynes, but got totally overlooked by the mainstreamers. So yes, Austrians and mainstreamers, people's demands are insatiable, but not the demands for the stuff that needs to be produced, and therefore requires workers. So we cannot guarantee that even though people always want more and more, that the things they want more of generates a job. Now that's a long story there. Hopefully you'll never have to go into it. As I said, I only one time in all the times I done give this talk, I've had to bring that up. But honestly, the vast majority of people have no problem believing that increasing technology replaces jobs. Now that's not the only direction we can go with this to talk about unemployment, but I like it because it's easy for people to picture it, and I don't get any pushback on it, right? Because we got to build up here. We got to move up. We got to build on things that they already think make sense, and then push them at the end. All right. So main point. Our economy has systemic flaws. Firms have an incentive to replace workers with machines. By the way, don't mention at this point that Marx also said this. Real bad idea. All right. So anyway, zero reason to believe that the market system will create a job for every willing worker. Well, what to do? What to do? We can make up to 36 units of output, 12 people times 3 units each, but our workers' demand is only for 24. And we honestly can't even maintain 24 because why are we going to produce the output for the people that can't afford to buy it because they ain't got a job? We have the productive capacity to meet everybody's needs, even exceeding the current socially accepted level, and yet we typically languish below that level. And we would do if we didn't have any government intervention whatsoever. And I slipped that in the side over there. Now, at this point, I'll often go into some detail on the Great Depression. Roaring 20s was a period of rapid economic growth in both capacity of production and productivity. Therefore, the 1930s should have been a period of prosperity, the likes of which the planet had never seen. Instead, we got an economic and social disaster that contributed directly to fascism and totalitarianism. Sound kind of familiar, doesn't it? So what to do? Well, one possible solution is a universal basic income. We could give the 4 people that we didn't need. Remember, we had 12 people. We only needed 8 of them to produce enough output for all 12, right? But, those last 4 that didn't have a job, well, they can produce output for them, but they can't buy it. We could give them universal basic income. That would allow them to buy stuff we could already afford to produce, and it increases their standard of living and creates employment for others. Problem is, with the universal basic income, I got a whole nother video on this. Universal basic income is the fact that it leaves so many social problems unsolved, all right? Social problems that the private sector would never address. Unprofitable social problems. If it's profitable, the private sector will do it. A hamburger stand is very profitable. We don't need to have a whole chain of George Washington hamburger stands. Hamburgers are soft, you can eat them with wooden teeth. There's a rumor about his dentures. So instead, we should stand ready to provide employment for anyone willing to work, but unable to find employment in the private sector. All right, now this is, of course, the job guarantee. And so now, let's say your audience is kind of with you right now. They're teetering, though, to be honest. They're teetering. They're like, well, what is there that they could do? And I've got some things I've pulled straight from Pavlina Chernova here. We've got, she's another one of the ranchers down the street. We've got climate change mitigation, which is the key problem we face today. Elder care, cleanup of vacant properties, reclamation of materials, restoration of public spaces, after-school activities or adult skill classes in schools or local libraries, facilitating extended day programs for school children, shadowing teachers, coaches, and hospice workers and librarians to learn new skills and assist them in their duties, organizing nutrition surveys in schools, coordinating health awareness programs for young mothers, organizing urban campuses, co-ops, classes, and training and apprenticeships in sustainable agriculture. We could be supporting historians, the arts, and so much more. And not only are these social needs that are being ignored right now, but the income created by these jobs, because we're going to be paying these people to do this stuff, is also going to end up contributing to private sector income. It's going to go right to, well, not going to go right to profits, but a lot of it's going to go to profits. So there's a lot of reasons for the capitalist class, again, a term you should probably not bring up when you're talking about this with folks that are not already leaning your direction, but a lot of reasons why they should be in favor of it. There's also some reasons why they should be against it, but we won't bring those up right here. All right. And don't forget, we already do this. We already do it with national defense, with public education, national parks, police and fire departments, etc. Back during the Cold War, my father lived in West Virginia. He went to a couple years of college, didn't like college very much. And fortunately, the threat of the Soviet Union meant that my dad could join up in the United States Air Force and go off to England. And he learned skills in the Air Force that he used for the rest of his life. And I don't just mean eating food that doesn't look real tasty, but actually he loved the food. So I take all that back. But warehousing kind of stuff he did. All right. So we had this enemy that we could build up employment by employing people in things that we figured was socially beneficial. We all don't want to learn Russian, and yet. So let's make sure my dad's out there defending the pubs of London, which is exactly what he did to great effect. Well, during World War II, obviously. I have a whole video on that too. That's one of my favorites, to be honest with you. So, our current problem, however, now I say we already do this to an extent with national defense and so on. Our problem is that we don't expand and contract those opportunities as a direct function of fluctuations in the private sector. For example, right now the economy is not doing terrible. So we would be shrinking the number of job guaranteed jobs. And then when it's not doing well, like it did for most of the 2000s up to now, then we would have more of those opportunities. All right, so let's say you got your audience to this point. And here's something I've only picked up on recently. And that is that you do need to stop and say, all right, everybody, let's see where we're standing right now. What I've tried to argue so far is X, Y, and Z, all right? So make sure everybody doesn't get confused with all the details, and they're like, well, okay. What you're saying, John Harvey, is that that the private sector not going to create enough jobs for everybody, but the government could, and that's one possible solution, right? So the job guarantee is a logical solution that not only allows the unemployed the income necessary to buy output, but addresses all those problems, creates dignity, and there's a real good piece by Pavlina Cherneva at the Levy Institute on all the consequences of unemployment, which, by the way, interestingly enough, she explained in the context of a viral outbreak. And yes, she wrote this before the COVID disaster. I wonder if she's part of it. I don't know. Probably not. Right. So, what's the next question going to be? All right, what's the next question going to be? If they're kind of with you, you're starting to lose them now, to be honest, but they're kind of with you. They're going to, what's it going to cost? Well, that's actually my favorite part, because it's made easy by having laid the foundation to where they want to hear an answer now. They want to hear that the government can do something. They want to hear, if they're buying into this so far, they want to hear a way we can get out of this. All right, so there's two parts to the answer here. The first thing, and this is actually very recent in the way I do this, I've got a book under review right now on business cycles, and chapter 5 is all about the job guarantee. All right, so I got all kind of calculations in there. It was, have you ever written something angry? I wrote it angry. And it just flowed out. All right, so and kindly, Pavlina Cherneva and Randy Ray read it for me, so they both commented on it, so I think it's okay. So anyway, I went through and did all these calculations. So here's the first thing I want to tell somebody when I come up with this possible solution. A job guarantee wage that is even marginally above the living wage. And if you have ever done, and in my chapter I do all this, I go through how ungenerous the living wage is. You know, it counts $8 a day for food. That's a couple years old now, but $8 a day for food, yeah, you're not living high on the hog, as we say here on the ranch. All right. Even with a wage that is only marginally above the living wage, and including child care, health care, and administrative costs, we could have reduced unemployment from 2000 to 2020 to near zero. And bear in mind, this was a terrible period, 2000 to 2020. It includes two of the worst downturns, because I'm including the COVID downturn in this, two of the worst downturns in economic history, and some of the weakest expansions. We could have reduced unemployment from the 2000 to 2020 for basically 1/3 of what we paid for defense on average, and 1/6 the cost of Social Security. Unemployment near zero, instead of near, well, the actual average was 6. All right, the actual average was 6 over that period, and this is a very conservative estimate. All right, I whenever I could, I said, well, okay, let's err on the side of caution. All right, so we would have been the envy of the world with unemployment near zero. And remember all the side effects of this. Reducing alcoholism, drug use, psychological problems. We're addressing social problems, right? So, but wait, there's more. And again, you want to do this a little bit at a time and not overwhelm anybody. Not only is the cost relative to what we spend every year really small, and almost assuredly, the monetary benefits would way outweigh the monetary cost. But as you know, the government, the federal government's overall budget does not face a budget constraint. All right. Now, I'm not going to go into detail here because that's all over the place. I'm just trying to tell you how I lead into it in a way that I hope gets my listeners thinking, "Oh, that sounds great. Oh, well, let's run out there and do this today." Okay, well, they don't do that. But get them in a frame of mind where we're not hitting them cold with, well, the government doesn't face a budget constraint. They're going to push back against it right away. All right. If you set them up with a situation to where they want to hear that that's the way it is, then it makes the story a lot easier. And by the way, in telling the story about the government not facing a budget constraint, one of the positive side effects of COVID was the fact that it made that talk, part of the talk, a lot easier. Where do you think the money got to where do you think the U.S. government got the $1,200 they paid everybody in the summer of 2020? Do you think they borrowed that from the American people who were facing one of the worst levels of unemployment since the Great Depression? Do you think they borrowed it from China that was in the throes of the pandemic? Europe, who at the time was having a worse situation than we were? Of course not. They just created it with a wave of a wand, the strike of a keyboard, and they can do that forever. Resources are in limited supply, but dollars are not. Now, it's probably a good idea to address the inflation thing real quickly here and how the job guarantee fits into that, because given that it's programmed in, it's less likely to create excess demand and inflation and so forth. But but otherwise, I'll leave that to you, depending on how the audience is going back and forth. Now, once again, you can only challenge a few conventional wisdoms in one sitting. I have said some things here that I greatly oversimplified and don't even necessarily agree with 100%, but I'm trying to make one point. Speaking of which, you got to be patient with people, very patient. Don't forget that all of the famous MMT economists of today once believed something else, once believed something that was quite wrong about federal government budgeting. It took them time and reflection to come to their current realizations. So remember that with your audience, right? And note too that my poor suffering wife, she had to hear me give a talk on the debt and the deficit 3 times before, after the 3rd time, she came up to me after the talk. She's like, "Oh, now I get it. Now I get it." It took 3 times from somebody who was already positively disposed to believing what I was saying to finally say it clicked. And now she's a diehard supporter. So, as I say, that's how I do it. I was a post-Keynesian institutionalist macroeconomist before I came across MMT. So that's the way I think. I think about the structure of the economy first, and then I plug the MMT and job guarantee into it. That might not work for you, and it might not work for every audience member, but that's what I was doing. And I think of our whole movement this way. Now, speaking of the Cold War, back during the Cold War, a standard Soviet tactic was to have an offensive on a wide front all across West Germany. Let me check out my monitor over there. Oh yeah, it's a very uncolorful map. I have a much nicer map here. This is a game called NATO from back in 1970-something. They did an updated version of it. Oh, it's beautiful, but it's also 2 big maps. I couldn't hold both maps up at once. So anyway, you'll have to live with this map right here. All right, so let's see here. Oh yeah, here's north. All right, so there's you can kind of see Denmark right here, right? And then here's East Germany over here, West Germany over here. So, can't see it real clearly here, but across the north is what they call the North German Plain. Wide open tank country, real good tank country, all right? Now, down the south is where, and that's the British. The British were defending up there along with the Belgians and the Dutch and, of course, the Germans. The Americans were down here, all right? And this is the Fulda Gap through here. It's a gap through some mountains and woods, a Fulda Gap. So, commies, where are you going to attack? Well, let's attack everywhere. let's attack everywhere and see where we're making the most progress. And where we're making the most progress, we make a big push, all right? So that's the way I see us right now. I see us as, hey, let's try different things and see where we're making the most progress and push there. The new movie is out. I got a chance to see that. I got to sit right next to Stephanie Kelton while we watched that. If you have seen the movie, the one scene with, I think it's Bernstein, where he cannot answer any questions about the way the government works, she leans over and says, you're going to really like this next part. And boy, did I. It's fun laughing at people that are wrong. Anyway, actually, no, it's not. Because you got to be patient and you got to work with them, all right? So, find what works for you, experiment, think about your audience, and get out there and fight.